as most of my longtime subscribers know, I have a substantial collection of surplus and collectible firearms. Of particular interest to me are the World War II era rifles. That was basically the only war in history that was fought everywhere around the planet. In the frozen Arctic, in the jungles of Asia, the deserts of Africa, the swamps of India, and just about every environment in between. There really were only two rifles in that area that endured heavy combat in every extreme around the world and had no issues doing it. And those rifles were the Mauser 98 and the Lee Enfield. Unfortunately, the Mauser 98 gets all of the attention from firearm historians, and the humble Lee Enfield has basically been relegated to a footnote in firearm history. But that, my friends, is a travesty, because the Lee Enfield was a better rifle than the Mauser in many ways. And even though the K98 was a rifle that easily transitioned into civilian use, the Lee Enfield was in fact a better implement of war. The Mauser can easily be customized, accurized, dropped into just about any aftermarket stock, and fitted with a scope pretty easily. It's also pretty strong, and it's a safe design. Because of this, it became the darling of the sporting rifle aftermarket after World War II ended. But as an implement of war, the Lee Enfield was a superior weapon in my opinion. It had twice the ammunition capacity of the Mauser, and it had a smoother bolt and shorter bolt throw. The Lee Enfield was also easier to load, and it had much better sights in my opinion. Accomplishing that mad minute was pretty much an impossible feat for the Mauser. After World War II, the UK started producing the best and final version of the Lee Enfield, the No.4 Mk2 rifle. The No.4 Mk2 had better sights, a slightly better trigger, and overall just improved fit and finish over previous models. The No.4 Mk2 was in service in the UK until about the mid-1950s, when it was replaced by the L1A1. And that brings us to the topic of this video, the legend of the Irish contract rifles. In the mid-1950s, the Royal Ordnance Factory in Vazackerley, England, manufactured 50,000 No.4 Mk2 rifles for Ireland. These were known as the Irish contract rifles. These rifles have been shrouded in mystery and bad information among collectors for the last 30 years, making them the most controversial guns the collecting world has ever seen. For almost 25 years, many people believed that these rifles were never even shipped to Ireland, and they remained in a military storage facility in England until about 1990. But in the last 5 or 6 years, actual documentation and first-hand accounts have proven that these Irish contract rifles were indeed delivered to Ireland and later sold by Ireland. People also believe that these rifles had special markings or features that only Irish contract rifles have. But once again, that's also not true. The only way to tell if you have a real Irish contract rifle is by the serial number on your No.4 Mk2 and by the matching bayonet. There were, in fact, 2 contracts of Lee Enfield rifles sold to Ireland. The first batch was in 1923, and those rifles were Mark IIIs marked with the FF in a circle stamp. But the legendary Irish contract rifles that everyone refers to are from the mid-1950s batch of No.4 Mk2s that were sold by the UK to Ireland. And those 50,000 rifles are said to be the best Lee Enfields ever made. But those bolt-action rifles quickly became obsolete as major militaries transitioned to a self-loading main battle rifle. Also, the .303 British cartridge was dying a rapid death as NATO-aligned countries were transitioning to the 7.62 by 51 round. Since that time, the Irish Defence Force has gone through the FAL and finally switched to the Steyr AUG in the late 80s. Although many of those contract rifles sat in storage unissued, some of them were used in battle. Some of those contract rifles saw fierce combat in the Congo in 1960, right before the FAL was issued a year later. If you get the chance, watch the movie The Siege of Jadotville. John F. Kennedy became enamored with one of these rifles on a 1963 visit to Ireland. He ended up taking that rifle home with him. That Irish contract rifle was also part of John F. Kennedy's funeral. It was the only time a foreign military has ever performed a ceremony at a U.S. president's funeral. The Irish contract rifle was used graveside at the Arlington National Cemetery during his funeral. Today, that rifle is located behind glass in Wexford, Ireland. But some of those contract rifles remained in use by the FCA, or Irish Army Reserves, until 1990. The FCA reservists finally dumped the Lee Enfield and went to the FAL in 1990. This meant that those old Irish contract rifles sitting in military storage no longer had a purpose, so they were sold in the 1990s. Most of the Irish contract rifles were sold by Century Arms in the early to mid-1990s and distributed to the American market. In the late 90s, the remainder of the contract rifles were finally sold. The initial sale in the early 90s were mostly heavily used rifles. The sales in the mid-90s were mostly unissued rifles, and the sales in the late 90s were all unissued rifles in mint condition. During the sale of these Irish contract rifles, and in the ensuing years, these rifles became the stuff of legend. When Century Arms advertised these as brand new unfired Lee Enfields, everybody just had to have one, including myself. You know, when Century started calling these things the Irish contract rifles, everyone's imagination went wild with rumors of their origin and history. I was there when a crate of these mint rifles was open, and I was awestruck by what I saw. Initially, nobody really paid too much attention to these Irish contract rifles until the hundreds of crates of unissued rifles hit the market in about the mid-1990s. Then, their reputation for quality and excellent accuracy overshadowed the mystique surrounding their origins. Rumor got around among collectors that if you really wanted a Lee Enfield shooter, you had to get an Irish gun. Fresh off my '03 FFL, I bought a crate of these. That's right, I bought a crate of these back in the day. And I'll never forget opening up that box and that strong smell of cosmoline just overcame me with anticipation. Then when I finally removed all that protective paper on it, looking at this shiny, basically brand new Lee Enfield in that box was just a religious experience. I carefully cleaned all the heavily caked on cosmoline off this gun and marveled at just how absolutely perfect it was. I've owned half a dozen Lee Enfields and I've handled countless more, but this thing was just amazing to me. All the serial numbers on this rifle are matching. And this thing is just in absolutely mint condition. It's never been fired since it left the factory in 1954. And the only thing I've done to this rifle is I removed all of the cosmoline off of it, or about as much as I could. I coated the bore and internals with Corrosion X, and I treated the stock with Renaissance wax. And I don't really plan on firing this rifle. The fit and finish on these Irish contract rifles is just amazing. In the post-war era, nothing was rushed and no corners were cut. Business wasn't guaranteed anymore. So the product had to be perfect, and these were perfect. I love these sights better than the previous model Lee Enfields. And the trigger on these is also slightly better. Yes, Lee Enfield rifles didn't have a good reputation for their triggers, but these No.4 Mark II triggers are good by period standards, I'd say. And unlike most Lee Enfields of the day, these have absolutely no looseness in the stocks, and everything is tightly fitted to perfection. People who say that these Irish contract rifles are the best aren't exaggerating. This rifle is just perfect in every way. I've been getting a lot of requests for more surplus rifle content, and I hope that this video delivered that to you. Everyone knows the history of the Lee Enfield, but many of you didn't know anything about these Irish contract rifles, so I hope this video was educational. Most Irishmen aren't particularly fond of their neighbors to the east, which is probably why the origin of these rifles is so hotly debated. Up until 5 or 6 years ago, no one was really sure about the history of these rifles. In the end, most internet conjecture turned out to be false, and documents were uncovered and first-person accounts were collected, and these rifles, it turned out, were indeed made in England under contract to the Irish Defense Forces. And some of these rifles even saw combat. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video about the Irish contract rifles. Thank you for watching, and as always, good hunting.